From the outside, the Harris family looked flawless. The kind of flawless that made people slow down their cars when they passed the house. White fence freshly painted. Lawn trimmed with near-military precision. Curtains always drawn at the same angle, letting in just enough light to feel warm but never messy. Perfect. Daniel Harris used to water the lawn every morning at exactly 6:30 a.m. Neighbors could set their watches by him. Coffee mug in one hand, hose in the other, smiling politely at anyone who waved. He worked as a financial consultant downtown. Successful, reliable, predictable. A man everyone trusted with money and secrets. His wife, Laura Harris, was the heart of that picture-perfect scene. At least that's what people like to believe. Laura volunteered at the school, baked for charity events, and never missed a parents' meeting. She had mastered the kind of smile that felt soft, effortless, permanent. The smile that told you everything was under control. And then there were the kids. Ethan, 16. Smart, polite, captain of the debate team. Teachers described him as mature for his age. And Lily, 10. Quiet, observant, always drawing pictures of houses with no doors. If you asked anyone on their street, they would tell you the same thing. That family has everything. What no one ever said, what no one ever noticed, was how quiet that house was at night. Not the peaceful kind of quiet. The heavy kind. Inside the Harris home, silence wasn't comfort. It was a rule. Dinner was served every evening at 7 p.m. sharp. Daniel sat at the head of the table. Laura to his right. The children across from them. Phones were never allowed. Television stayed off. Conversations were controlled. How was school? Daniel would ask, already knowing the answer. Fine. Ethan responded every time. Did you finish your homework? Yes. Good. Laura rarely spoke unless spoken to. When she did, her voice was careful. Soft. Perfectly measured. Yes, Daniel. That sounds lovely, Daniel. You're right, Daniel. Lily learned early not to interrupt. She learned that questions led to tension, and tension led to long silences that felt worse than yelling. So the children learned to behave. To smile when guests were over. To laugh at the right moments. To never mention the way their mother flinched when someone spoke too loudly. Laura wasn't unhappy. At least that's what she told herself. She told herself that stability mattered more than comfort. That routine mattered more than freedom. That Daniel's need for control was just how successful men stayed successful. She told herself all of this while standing in front of the bathroom mirror every morning, applying makeup carefully over a bruise that never stayed in the same place for long. Foundation first. Then concealer. Then the smile. Perfection takes practice. Neighbors never heard arguments from the Harris house. They never heard raised voices, slammed doors, crying. Daniel believed strongly in privacy. And Laura believed strongly in survival. The night before everything changed was no different from any other. Daniel reviewed emails in the living room, feet up on the coffee table. Ethan was upstairs studying. Lily sat cross-legged on the floor, coloring silently. Laura stood in the kitchen, her hands gripping the edge of the counter a little too tightly. Did you lock the back door? Daniel asked without looking up. Yes. Are you sure? Laura paused. Yes, I'm sure. He glanced up then. Just for a second. Long enough to make her chest tighten. Go check again. She did. Because perfect wives don't argue. When she returned, Daniel nodded and went back to his laptop. Order restored. Later that night, after the house went dark, Laura lay awake staring at the ceiling. Daniel slept beside her, breathing slow and steady. She thought about the drawer in her closet. The one Daniel didn't open. Inside it was a folded letter she'd written months ago and never sent. A list of things she was afraid of. A list of things she wasn't allowed to say out loud. She thought about Ethan growing quieter by the day. About Lily's drawings, always missing doors and windows. About how carefully she timed her movements to avoid questions. She thought about leaving. And then she didn't. Morning came like it always did. 6:30 a.m. lawn watering. 7 a.m. breakfast. 8 a.m. Daniel leaves for work. Perfect. At 10:42 a.m., a neighbor heard a sound that didn't belong. Not shouting. Not crying. Something sharp. Something final. At 11:18 a.m., police cars lined the street for the first time. Sirens broke the rhythm of perfection. Inside the Harris house, Daniel lay dead in the living room. The man everyone trusted. The husband everyone admired. The father no one suspected. Laura sat on the couch, hands folded in her lap, makeup still perfect. No tears. No shock. Just silence. When the officer asked, "Can you tell us what happened?" Laura looked up calmly and said, "I don't know. Everything was perfect." And in that moment the perfect family finally cracked open. Because the murder nobody expected was only the beginning. The neighbors stood behind their curtains as the police moved through the Harris house. No one said it out loud, but the same question passed through every mind on the street. How could this happen here? The house still looked perfect from the outside. Flowers planted symmetrically along the walkway. No broken windows. No signs of forced entry. It didn't look like the scene of a murder. Inside it felt colder. Daniel Harris's body lay exactly where he'd fallen, on the living room rug he'd insisted on importing from overseas. The paramedics confirmed what everyone could already see. He was gone. One deep wound to the chest. Precise. Powerful. Not sloppy. Not frantic. Intentional. Detective Sarah Mills had been doing this job long enough to know one thing. Crimes committed in perfect homes were never as perfect as they appeared. She watched Laura Harris sit on the couch, hands folded neatly in her lap, eyes dry. Too dry. Some people scream. Some sob. Some dissociate. Laura did none of those. "Mrs. Harris," Sarah said gently, pulling a chair close so they were eye level, "I'm going to ask you a few questions." Laura nodded. Of course. Her voice was calm, controlled, almost professional. "When did you last see your husband alive?" "This morning," Laura said. "Around 8. He left for work like he always does." "And you stayed home?" "Yes. I had errands, cleaning, phone calls." Sarah watched her carefully. No hesitation. No tremor. "Did he seem upset? Worried? Angry?" Laura smiled faintly. Daniel was never angry. Sarah made a small note in her pad. That answer told her more than Laura realized. Across the room, Officer James spoke quietly with Ethan. 16 years old. Straight posture. Hands clasped behind his back like he'd been trained for questioning. "Did you hear anything unusual this morning?" James asked. Ethan shook his head. "No, sir." "Where were you when your father died?" "At school." "Anyone who can confirm that?" "My teacher." "I never left." His voice didn't crack. His eyes didn't water. James exchanged a glance with Sarah. In the kitchen, Lily sat swinging her legs off a chair that was too tall for her. A police officer knelt beside her, trying to sound friendly. "Hey, sweetheart. I like your drawings," she said, nodding to the notebook Lily clutched tightly. Lily didn't smile. "Can you tell me what happened today?" the officer asked. Lily shrugged. "I was at school." "Did you hear your parents arguing last night?" Lily shook her head. But after a long pause, she added quietly, "They don't argue." That answer stayed with the officer long after. The autopsy results came quickly. Time of death: approximately 9:30 a.m. Cause: a single fatal wound inflicted by a kitchen knife. The knife, one of the Harris family's matching stainless steel set, was found washed, dried, and returned to its drawer. Whoever did this hadn't panicked. They cleaned up. The detectives returned that evening. This time the house felt different. The silence had shifted. "Mrs. Harris," Sarah said, standing near the kitchen counter, "can you walk me through your morning again?" Slowly. Laura complied. She described making coffee, sorting laundry, calling her sister, watching part of a morning show. The timeline was neat. Convenient. Too convenient. "And when did you last enter the living room?" Sarah asked. Laura paused. "After lunch," she said. "That's when I found him." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "But the medical examiner says time of death was around 9:30. Laura didn't miss a beat. "Then I must be mistaken. Mistakes happen." But Sarah noticed how Laura's hands tightened around each other when she said it. Later that night, alone in their bedrooms, the children processed the day in very different ways. Ethan sat at his desk, staring at his laptop screen without typing. His jaw remained clenched, teeth pressed so tightly together his head ached. He replayed the sound in his mind. Not a scream. Just a sharp noise. A noise you couldn't take back. Down the hall, Lily lay awake hugging her pillow. Her eyes drifted to the corner of her room where shadows met the ceiling. She thought about the night they weren't supposed to remember. The night her mother told her to lock her door and not come out, no matter what she heard. Lily squeezed her eyes shut. Perfect families didn't have rules like that. The following days brought food donations, sympathy cards, and casseroles from concerned neighbors. "Oh, Laura," they said, hugging her. "We can't imagine." Laura accepted each embrace with grace. She wore black. She spoke softly. She allowed herself a single tear at the funeral. Nothing more, nothing less. Daniel's colleagues stood up and talked about integrity, leadership, commitment to family. Ethan stared straight ahead. Lily stared at the floor. When the house finally emptied later that evening, Laura stood alone in the hallway. For the first time since the police arrived, she let herself breathe. She walked into the bedroom she'd shared with Daniel and opened the closet drawer he never checked. Inside, beneath the folded letter, was a second object. A phone. An old one. Cheap. Hidden carefully. She powered it on. No new messages. But as her thumb hovered over the screen, her hand trembled for the first time in years. Perfection was exhausting. And cracks, once formed, never stayed hidden forever. Meanwhile, Detective Mills sat at her desk reviewing notes. One question burned brighter than the others. If this family was so perfect, why did everyone seem so relieved that Daniel was gone? Somewhere between the smiles, the silence, and the cleaned knife, something dark had been living in that house for a very long time, and it was only just beginning to come into the light. The house didn't feel haunted after Daniel died. It felt lighter. That was the thought Laura hated herself for noticing. The silence had changed, not disappeared but softened. It no longer pressed down on her chest or wrapped around her throat. For the first time in years, she walked from room to room without anticipating a question. Where are you going? Why are you taking so long? What are you looking at? Those questions were gone. Instead, there was a different tension now, one woven with police scrutiny, broken routines, and memories that refused to stay buried. Detective Sarah Mills returned 3 days after the funeral. She didn't bring flowers this time. She brought questions. "Mrs. Harris," Sarah said, sitting across from Laura at the dining table. Daniel had insisted stay spotless at all times. "I want to talk about the night before your husband died." Laura folded her hands exactly the same way she had since the first interview. "All right. Did anything unusual happen?" "No." Sarah waited. "Any arguments?" Daniel's voice echoed in Laura's mind. "We don't air our problems." "We didn't argue," Laura said. "We never did." Sarah nodded slowly. "That's interesting." "Why?" "Because most families argue," Sarah replied evenly. "Especially ones under stress." Laura's jaw tightened for a fraction of a second, just long enough for Sarah to catch it. That tiny crack. Ethan listened from the top of the stairs. He hadn't meant to eavesdrop, but when the detective arrived, his stomach twisted, and his feet carried him there without permission. "Your neighbors say the house was always quiet," Sarah continued. "No raised voices. No disturbances." "Yes," Laura replied. "We valued peace." "Peace doesn't usually require silence," Sarah said. Laura looked up sharply. The detective's gaze held, not accusatory but probing. That night hadn't been peaceful. Ethan remembered it differently than the stories being told. He remembered his father coming home earlier than usual, the front door opening too hard, the air shifting. Daniel had gone straight to the living room. Laura followed, her movements careful, controlled. Ethan stayed halfway down the stairs unseen. That's when the arguing started. Not loud. Controlled. Dangerous. "You told her again," Daniel's voice said, low and sharp. "I told her nothing," Laura replied. "You looked at me," Daniel snapped. "You'd been crying." Silence. Then Laura said very quietly, "She's noticing things, Daniel." Ethan's hands had gone cold on the railing. "Then teach her not to," Daniel said. Something inside Ethan tightened. Then another sound cut through the tension. Not shouting. A sharp noise. Metal hitting wood. He'd stepped back immediately, heart pounding, breath trapped in his chest, before the stairs could betray him. And then nothing. No screaming. No chaos. Just stillness. That was what frightened him most. Back in the present, Sarah stood to leave. One more thing, she said. Were there any weapons missing from the house that night? Laura didn't hesitate. No. Sarah paused. And the kitchen knives? All accounted for. Yes. Sarah opened her notebook, as if reconsidering something. Because the knife we found had been cleaned very thoroughly. That's not typical in crimes of passion. Laura met her eyes. Then maybe it wasn't passion. Sarah studied her for a long moment before nodding. After she left, Ethan sat on his bed staring at the wall. He'd practiced the timeline so many times it felt real now. School. Classes. Teachers. Attendance records. Perfect. But his memory kept returning to one thought. What if someone heard? Down the hall, Lily sat on the floor drawing. This time her house had doors. But one door was half open. Mom came into her room quietly and sat beside her. You're doing so well, Laura said softly. I'm proud of you. Lily didn't look up. Is Daddy really gone? Laura swallowed. Yes. Lily nodded slowly. He won't come back? No. Lily pressed her crayon harder into the paper. He used to say I talk too much. Laura's breath hitched. You can talk as much as you want now, she said. Lily finally looked up at her mother. Did you make him stop yelling? The question landed heavily in the room. Laura's instinct was to answer quickly, to smooth it over. But Lily's eyes were too sharp for lies. I made things safe, Laura said instead. Lily considered that. Then she nodded. Yes, she said quietly. It's quiet now. That night after the kids were asleep, Laura retrieved the second phone from the drawer. She sat at the kitchen table, the overhead light off, illuminated only by the screen. The phone vibrated once. A saved draft message never sent. If anything happens to me, check the pantry shelf. Laura closed her eyes. She walked to the pantry and reached behind the row of canned goods. Her fingers touched an envelope taped to the wall. Inside were copies, bank records, messages, a tiny audio recorder. Proof she hadn't been imagining it. Proof she hadn't been alone. Her hands shook as she placed everything back. The plan wasn't supposed to end like this. She'd planned to leave quietly, carefully. She hadn't planned for blood. The next morning, Sarah Mills received a call from the forensic lab. The knife. They'd found partial fingerprints. 3 sets. Daniel's, Laura's, and a third, too small to belong to an adult. Sarah stared at the report as something horrible and heavy took shape. She thought of Lily's drawings, houses without doors, and rules about staying in bedrooms. That evening, Sarah returned to the Harris house unannounced. Laura opened the door calmly. Mrs. Harris, Sarah said, I need to ask you something difficult. Laura nodded once. All right. On the night your husband died, did your children see anything? Laura didn't answer immediately. Behind her, Ethan appeared in the hallway. They locked eyes for a moment. A look passed between them. An old understanding. Laura stepped aside and opened the door wider. Yes, she said softly. They did. And with that admission, the perfect family finally shattered. Because what happened that night wasn't an accident. It was a choice. And not everyone made it alone. Detective Sarah Mills had learned to recognize the moment when a case stopped being about what happened and started being about why. This was that moment. Laura's admission, quiet, measured, devastating, hung in the air like a held breath. Yes, Laura had said. They did. Sarah didn't push immediately. She'd learned that people revealed more when they were allowed to speak on their own terms. She stepped inside, closed the door behind her, and took in the scene with fresh eyes. The house was too calm for what it held. Which one? Sarah asked finally. Ethan or Lily? Laura hesitated. That hesitation told Sarah everything. Both, Laura said. Upstairs, Ethan sat on the edge of his bed, listening. He had always been good at listening. It was how he survived. How he learned when to stay quiet, when to agree, and when to disappear into himself. He knew this day was coming. He just hadn't known when. Lily, on the other hand, was in the living room, her feet tucked beneath her as she colored. When Sarah walked toward her, Lily didn't look up. You can talk to her, Sarah said gently to Laura. But I'll need to hear it too. Laura's shoulders sagged slightly, as if the weight she'd been carrying finally acknowledged itself. It was never supposed to be like this, Laura said. Like what? Sarah asked. Messy. Laura exhaled slowly. The story didn't come out in a rush. Came out carefully. Daniel Harris had never hit first. That was how Laura justified it for years. He criticized, controlled, monitored. He decided when the children spoke where they went, what they were allowed to feel. His anger was quiet, precise, exhausting. You don't understand how dangerous that can be, Laura said. When anger has rules. Sarah nodded. She did understand. Things changed when he started focusing on Lily, Laura continued. Sarah straightened. How so? She talks too much, Daniel had said one night. She listens too much. She notices things. Laura's hands clenched together. She's a child, Laura had told him. She's becoming a problem, Daniel replied. The phrase still made Laura's skin crawl. Daniel had begun correcting Lily more, criticizing her drawings, her questions, her natural curiosity. She needs discipline, he'd say, before she embarrasses us. Laura saw then what she hadn't wanted to see before. Daniel wasn't losing control. He was extending it. And you were planning to leave, Sarah said quietly. Yes, Laura replied. I was saving money, copying documents, gathering proof. So what went wrong? Laura closed her eyes. That night, she said. He told Ethan he was disappointed in him. Upstairs, Ethan swallowed. He remembered that moment clearly. Daniel standing too close. His hand gripping Ethan's shoulder a second too long. You'll never be impressive unless you learn how to obey, Daniel had said. Ethan hadn't responded. He never did. I saw Ethan's face, Laura said. Something broke in him. She paused, her voice shaking for the first time. And then Lily asked a question. Sarah's breath caught. What question? Why are you always mad at us? Silence filled the room. Daniel had turned slowly toward Lily. That's not your place, he'd said. I just want to know, Lily replied. Laura had stepped between them instinctively. Daniel, she'd said. Stop. Daniel stared at her. In that moment Laura knew. Not suspected. Knew. If she didn't act, if she waited any longer, the control would turn into something worse. Something irreversible. What happened next wasn't shouted. It wasn't chaotic. Daniel reached for the counter. The knife. Laura moved first. She grabbed his wrist. There was a struggle, short, sharp, desperate. The sound Ethan heard. The knife fell. Laura screamed at the children to go upstairs. Ethan grabbed Lily's hand and pulled her toward the stairs. They heard one last sound behind them. Metal. Then nothing. Daniel collapsed. The room went still. For several seconds no one moved. Then Lily said the words no one could forget. Is he done? Sarah's chest tightened. That wasn't how it was supposed to end, Laura whispered. He was supposed to leave. Or be exposed. Or stop. But he didn't, Sarah said. No, Laura replied. He fought. There was a knock at the front door. Everyone froze. For a brief, horrifying moment, Laura thought Daniel might get up. But the knocking stopped. Whatever life Daniel had owned ended right there on the rug he'd chosen. You cleaned the knife, Sarah said. Yes. Why? Laura looked up, tears finally spilling over. Because I didn't want Lily to remember blood. I wanted the house to feel safe. Ethan came downstairs then. He stood beside his mother, taller than she remembered him being. I told Lily to lock her door, he said quietly. I told her not to come out no matter what. Sarah turned toward him. And you? She asked. I stayed, Ethan said. To protect them. Lily looked up from her drawing. Her picture showed a house. This time the door was wide open. Daddy was loud, she said simply. Mommy made him quiet. Sarah kneeled in front of her. That must have been scary. Lily nodded. But everything got better after. The room filled with silence once more. This time it wasn't heavy. It was sad. There's one more thing, Sarah said finally, standing. The fingerprints. Laura didn't ask. She already knew. Ethan, Sarah said gently. Your prints were on the knife. Ethan didn't deny it. I picked it up first, he said. When it fell, I handed it to her. Sarah closed her eyes. This wasn't just a murder. It was a family making impossible choices. And the most haunting part? The one person everyone assumed would be safe, the strong father, the respected husband, was the only one who didn't survive the truth. Daniel Harris was never supposed to die. He was supposed to lose control. But control had never learned how to let go. And now neither could the family he left behind. The truth didn't come out all at once. It never does. It unraveled slowly in rooms closed behind careful doors, in interviews recorded and replayed by people who stared too long at the same four walls, trying to decide where responsibility ended and necessity began. Detective Sarah Mills filed her report late that night. She wrote every detail, every statement, every pause that carried more weight than words. But what she didn't write, what no report could capture, was the way this family had learned to survive by absorbing silence into their bones. Laura was taken in for formal questioning the next morning. She changed clothes. Simple blouse. Neutral colors. No makeup this time. For the first time since Daniel's death, she didn't bother hiding the exhaustion on her face. In the interrogation room, Sarah sat across from her again. No lawyers? Sarah asked. Laura shook her head. I know what this looks like. And what does it look like? Sarah asked quietly. Laura stared at the table between them, like a woman who stayed too long. Sarah waited. I knew someday something would happen, Laura continued. I just didn't know what form it would take. For years, Laura had convinced herself that endurance was strength, that patience could outlast cruelty, that maintaining an image kept the world safe on the other side of the front door. We were the perfect family, Laura said bitterly. I thought that meant we were protected. Sarah leaned back in her chair. Perfect families don't exist, she said. But control often disguises itself as one. Meanwhile, Ethan sat alone in his room back home, staring at the ceiling. He wasn't afraid of prison. He was afraid of being misunderstood. He wasn't a violent boy. He had never been. Teachers loved him because he followed rules. His friends trusted him because he listened. But love, he had learned, could be warped into obedience. When Sarah came to speak to him again, he didn't hesitate. I didn't plan anything, Ethan said. I just reacted. To what? She asked. To watching my mother disappear, he replied. Sarah looked at him carefully. What do you mean by that? She stopped being loud, he said. Stopped laughing. Stopped disagreeing. She started timing herself, apologizing for things she didn't do. He paused. And Lily started shrinking too. In the living room, Lily sat drawing again. This time she was drawing people. 3 figures holding hands. No fourth outline left blank. When a social worker asked her how she felt, Lily answered honestly. Safe. The word made the social worker swallow hard. Not happy. Not sad. Safe. The prosecutors reviewed the case for weeks. They reconstructed the timeline, studied bruises on Laura's body that hadn't come from a single night, reviewed recordings Ethan had secretly saved, arguments muted, voices controlled, words carefully chosen to sound civilized. No evidence of a monster, just a pattern. And patterns, when ignored, grow teeth. Eventually a decision was made. Laura Harris would not be charged with murder. Excessive force? Yes. Premeditation? No. Self-defense extended to protect others. Ethan's fingerprints were explained as involvement without intent. He was a minor, acting under threat, attempting to help his mother. The case would close quietly. No trial. No press conference. No headlines screaming the truth. The public would be told what they preferred to hear. A tragic domestic incident. Neighbors nodded when they heard. Whispers circulated briefly, then faded. People like stories with neat endings. They don't like messy truths. The Harris house went up for sale 3 months later. Fresh paint. New lawn. Different curtains. A couple toured it one afternoon, holding hands, smiling at the spacious living room. Such a peaceful place, the woman said. Laura watched from the car across the street, her children beside her. Are we bad people? Lily asked suddenly. Laura turned to her daughter. No, she said firmly. We're survivors. Ethan looked out the window. What if people find out? Laura placed a hand on his shoulder. Then they'll finally see what perfection costs. They drove away without looking back. Years would pass. The story would fade. But inside that family lived a truth that bound them together tighter than lies ever could. They hadn't just lost a father. They had escaped a role. And the murder nobody expected? It wasn't the shocking part. The shocking part was how many people could live so close to perfection and never notice it was poisoned. The case closed without noise. No shouting reporters. No cameras outside the courthouse. No interviews requesting statements from the grieving widow or her children. Just paperwork, signatures, and silence. Detective Sarah Mills watched the file disappear into a cabinet. She hoped she'd never have to open again. On paper it was clean. Self-defense. Threat escalation. A household under psychological coercion. But Sarah had learned long ago that clean paperwork didn't mean clean endings. It just meant society had decided where to stop looking. Laura Harris signed the final documents in a small office that smelled like old coffee and disinfectant. Her hands were steady. She noticed that. It felt strange being steady again. The officer slid the papers toward her. That's it, Mrs. Harris. You're free to go. Free. The word didn't feel real. She walked out of the building into sunlight that felt too bright, too open. Ethan and Lily waited for her on the steps. Ethan stood when he saw her, immediately scanning her face for danger that no longer existed. It's over, Laura said. Lily looked up. Really over? Laura nodded. Yes. They hugged, awkwardly at first, then tighter. Three people holding onto something fragile and unfinished. That night, in their motel room, none of them slept. Not out of fear. Out of habit. Silence doesn't disappear just because the threat does. Ethan lay staring at the ceiling, replaying moments that didn't belong to him anymore. The sound of his father's voice, the rules, the certainty that love came with conditions. He wondered what kind of man he would become now that the pressure was gone. Lily curled beside her mother, tracing patterns on the blanket. Mom, she whispered. Yes. If Daddy was so bad, why did nobody notice? Laura closed her eyes. Because he knew how to look good, she said softly. And people like believing what looks good. There was no good answer to that. Only honesty. Weeks later they moved. New city. Smaller place. No lawn to maintain. No neighbors who remembered. Laura took a job where no one knew her history. Ethan enrolled in a new school where being quiet didn't automatically make you mature. Lily started drawing again. This time her houses had doors, and windows, and gardens with uneven lines. One afternoon months later Laura received a letter. No return address. Inside was a single page. A photocopy of an old police note that had never made it into the official file. It read, subject presented as calm, controlled. Evidence suggests long-term psychological dominance within household. Family identity built around avoidance, silence, and survival. Laura read it once. Then again. Then she folded it carefully and placed it in a drawer. Not to hide it. To remember it. Because what they did next mattered more than what they survived. Years passed. Ethan grew into someone who listened not because he was afraid but because he understood. Lily grew into someone who asked questions and didn't apologize for them. And Laura? She learned how to speak without measuring every word. Sometimes in quiet moments guilt surfaced. Daniel Harris had died on the living room floor. A human life ended. That truth never went away. But neither did another truth. If he had lived, something else in that house would have died instead. The family never talked publicly about what happened. They didn't need to. The truth lived between them. Fully seen, never denied. And somewhere in a neighborhood that once believed in perfection, new people walked past a house that looked calm, quiet, and ordinary. They never knew what had been buried there. Not just a body, but a lie. Because the most dangerous thing about a perfect family isn't what it hides. It's how many people are willing to help keep it buried. If you've stayed until this moment, thank you for listening, not just to the story but to what lives beneath it. A perfect family. Perfect life. A murder nobody expected. Isn't only about a death. It's about what people choose not to see. Perfect smiles. Quiet homes. Polite conversations. None of them guarantee safety. In fact, sometimes they hide the very things that need attention the most. This story asks an uncomfortable question. How many warning signs do we ignore because everything looks fine on the surface? Control doesn't always shout. Abuse doesn't always leave obvious marks. And survival doesn't always look heroic. Sometimes it looks like silence. Sometimes it looks like endurance. And sometimes it looks like a family making an impossible choice to protect what matters most. If this story made you pause, reflect, or see perfection a little differently, then it served its purpose. Stories like this are told to remind us to look deeper, listen closer, and never assume that quiet means safe. If you found this story powerful or meaningful, like the video, it helps these stories reach more people. Share it with someone who enjoys deep, emotional thrillers or true crime stories. Subscribe to the channel for more psychological thrillers, true crime-inspired stories, and dark narratives. New stories are always coming, slow, gripping, and real enough to stay with you. This is ShadowVoice. And remember, sometimes the most dangerous lies are the ones everyone agrees to believe.